Father God, we come to you this morning on behalf of one of our own. We ask you, Father, just to be with Larry and to Sharon and to give them a peace, and that they know who is in charge, and that they can trust you. Father, placing somebody's life, trusting someone over someone's life is a difficult thing. But we know you love her, and we know you love her much more than anybody else could. And so we just ask you, Father, to comfort her. Our request is that you heal her, and that she comes out of this just as normal as she was before this ever occurred. That would be our request, Father. And you ask us to come to you with our request. And you say you'll give us the desires. Of course, they have to line up with your will, so that's where we stand now, Father. You know our desire, but we don't know completely your will. And we ask, Father, that your will be done. And we'll trust in you and know that whatever should happen is in your hands. We thank you for all you've done in our lives. We thank you for the faithfulness of Sharon and all those here in this class who pray for her. And we know that after all this is said and done, that you will receive the glory from all of us and from Larry and from Sharon. We praise you for it in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, Hebrews chapter 12. We got one more chapter after this. Chapter 13, then we'll finish Hebrews. And I understand we're going to go to 1 Corinthians. So out of the frying pan into the fire we'll go. Hebrews chapter 12. But first I'll tell you about this guy that was driving down the road and with his friend. And his friend runs right straight through a stop sign. And he said, "Man, that was a stop sign. What you doing?" He said, "Well, I drive like my brother." A few blocks later, they come up to a red light, and that man just plows right through the red light. He says, "Did you see that red light?" He said, "Yeah, but I drive like my brother." So next, they come up to the next intersection. There's a green light, and he slows down and stops. He said, "Man, that's a green light. What's the matter with you?" He says, "My brother might be coming." You'll get it in a minute. Okay. The first verse in chapter 12 is one of those we've all heard, I'm sure. Everyone. First and second. I'm going to read it and then we'll get started. "Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God." We've all heard that verse, haven't we? Numerous times we've heard that verse. And you've been told that, there's a cloud of witnesses watching our lives and cheering us on, and that's really not what that says. I mean, if you want to say that, then, okay, that makes you feel good. That we're being watched and cheered for and all. But remember, it comes right after Hebrews 11. And what was that? That's the Hall of Faith. And so he's referring back to those characters in chapter 11. And he's saying that now they are our witnesses. Now, it's not witness in the sense of they're sitting there in an arena cheering us. It's a witness that they're in the arena and we're seeing how they performed, and they are a witness to us for us to do the same, to have faith. And so when you read that, just know it's talking about the influence others have on us if we look at their lives. And you know, that's what we do in life, isn't it? I'm a big football fan. I love to watch football. And football players, before they play the next team, they go to a film. And they look at that film and they look at what the other players do. And they learn from that. Those other players are witnessing to them in the sense of, this is what you to do. Or this is how I do it. Now, in that sense, they're trying to figure out how to keep them from doing what they do while they're playing their team. But in effect, that's what we have here. The writer is saying, look at these people of faith. See how they did it. And let them be an influence on your life. If they can do it, you can too. So that's where we stand with that. That's what it really, what he's saying. Now, he says that we are to set aside that sin, or the sin, that so easily ensnares us. He's not talking about all sins, although they all do, but he's talking about the sin that so easily ensnares you. Now, in this case, what was it? They were wanting to leave Christianity, go back to Judaism. For what purpose? To make life easier on themselves. Right? I mean, it's all about them. In our case, it could be something different. Every one of us has this little thing that we can do when we get trapped in a situation where we have to do something Christian. We have an excuse. Typically it's work. Well, I'm going to have to work that day. I can't do it. But every one of us has some sin that ensnares us, that traps us. And so he says we need to set aside that. Whatever it is that takes your focus off Christ, you need to set that aside. And you got to keep your eyes on Jesus. He says, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. What is the race that's set before us? What is that race? That's sanctification. That's the Christian life. This tells me that the Christian life requires endurance. Now, when I think of endurance, I think of something pretty difficult, don't you? I mean, for me to run 100 feet, I'm going to have to endure a lot of pain and a lot of laughter, people laughing at me. I remember when we did the, what's that? The Amazing Race up at, I can't remember the place up there. Help me, Bill. Epworth. We had one spot we stopped, we had to do jumping jacks. I hadn't done a jumping jack in 100 years. Oh, well. And I still haven't done one. I tried, my feet wouldn't come off the ground. You know, I was stuck. Christian life is endurance. And it's not easy. But God has put a lot of examples out there for us to look at and say, follow me. And not only that, you don't have to follow just like them, but to show that it can be done. Well, that's why we're surrounded by the witnesses. When he says, lay aside every weight, now everybody's heard this, that this is whoever wrote this must have been athletic or was into sports, because runners would put weights on them and run. And so when they ran and took them off, they felt lighter and they could run faster. That was the premise. And suppose it works. They do it today. And it seems to be working. That's why we have to take all the sins off of us, because those are our weights. They're not weights that are good, though. But they do keep us back. They slow us down, and they keep us from doing what we're called to do. And what does he say? The only way to do it is what? To look unto Jesus. It says, look unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Witnesses are good to look at. The Old Testament saints are good for them to look at, but they are still flawed human beings. And they do make mistakes. But you keep your eyes on Jesus, because he never makes a mistake. So keep your eyes on Jesus. That's how you run this race. And why? Because he's the one who designed the race, designed salvation. He's the one who finished salvation. He created it, and he finished it. If you'll remember on the cross, what was his last words? It is finished. What's finished? Salvation. So we keep the eyes on the man who did it. And we can't make any mistakes if we do that and we follow him. And not only that, he's still alive, because he sits on the right hand of God. He is our power. He gives us the power to run the race, and he's the advocate before God, the Father. Look at verses 5 through 7. And you have forgotten, 3 through 4. For consider him who endures such hostility from sinners against himself, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. You have not yet resisted the bloodshed, striving against sin. He said, now we keep our eyes on Jesus, and here's another reason you do, because consider him. He did this. He died for you, and he did it through bloodshed. People had to kill him. He was persecuted. And he's saying, look, you haven't done that. Which one of us has ever resisted on behalf of Christ, in Christ's name, and been beaten for it? None of us. Now, there have been, obviously. There have been some do that. We see that happening today. The genocide of Christians, chopping their heads off. But apparently these he were talking to never had done that. And we know that they didn't want to, because why? Because they don't like the persecution they're getting. And he's saying, look, it's not bad. Look at Jesus, what he went through. That's why we keep our eyes on him also. Verses 5 through 7. And you have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? Proverbs 3:11 and 12 is what the writer is referring them to. And it's really simple what he's saying. If you're a son, if you're a child of God, and you disobey, you're going to be punished. And he says, if you're not punished, or you're a child. Listen to it again. Have you forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as sons? My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you're rebuked by him. For who the Lord loves, he chastens. Too many times we get upset because God's chastening us, punishing us. Why me, God? Never forget Diane Kelmer. Linda asked her one time, you know, they have a child who, what is it that he had?
I don't know, he just had a
Anyway, it's
total care.
yeah. And he passed away a year or two ago. But anyway, Linda said, do you ever sometimes just wonder why? You know, and she says, no, I've always said, why not me?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what kind of attitude? I mean, that's a good attitude, isn't it? And I've never forgotten that. We can't cry over what God does to us. We have to know that it's because he loves us, and from it, we're going to learn. And when we come out on the other side, we're going to be better for it. We'll be better for it. And we'll thank him. I can't tell you how many times Linda and I have messed up in our lives. And God put us through it, but we got out of it and we said, well, thank you, Lord. Because now I'm in a better place. God will take your mistakes and make them pay off for you if you're humble. And he's done that for us. If you stand fast and endure the chastening of God, know this. God is dealing with you as his son or daughter. And we know this because all sons are corrected by their fathers. If you're not being chastened, at times when you go wrong, then you have to question, am I a child of God? Because he chastens who he loves. Verses 8 through 11. But if you are without chastening, of which all become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Well, that's just what I just said. He says all of them are partakers of chastening. Are you a child of God? Then you've been chastened at some time in your life. Furthermore, we have had, verse 9, furthermore, we have had human fathers who correct us, and we pay them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chasten us as seemed best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. We're being trained by God. And he trains us through chastening. We took it from our fathers, and now that we're an adult, we realize what? That he did it, our father did it for good. Our fathers and our mothers. I was corrected by my mother more than my father. She used to really know how to correct. And then we understand, don't we? Then it was painful. Certainly wasn't joyful. But now we understand we had a mind that had to be persuaded to do other than what we wanted to do. And it's not a bit of difference with God. Except with God, the rewards are a lot greater. We're chastened to become more righteous. And the more righteous we are, the more rewards we're going to get in heaven. So he doesn't do it just because he wants to, but just because he can. And that's what some people think, I think. God just does it because he can. Well, no, he does it because he loves you. And he's got a specific reason for doing it. It's to shape you and mold you into righteous person that you are. He's given us righteousness. God does it also. He gives it to us and conforms us to it. The world says, here's what you can be, but you got to conform yourself to get there. That's not the way God works. God just messes everybody's mind up. He does it his way. And it's never the way we would expect it to be. It's always different. He says it's not joyful, but it's painful. And if you've ever been chastened by God, you know it's painful. But the yield is the peaceable fruit of righteousness. And that trains you. Believe it or not, it gives you peace. Chaos in your life, if brought about by God's chastening, will defy the logic of the world. And it will bring about peace. Chaos brings peace. That makes sense. But it does with God. And what kind of peace is it? It's that peace that passes all understanding. In times of trouble, we can be peaceful. Verses 12 and 13. Therefore, strengthen the hands which hang down and feeble knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but rather be healed. You'll notice the word dislocated was added. It's in italics. Because the word lame itself means dislocate, to dislocate in the Greek. What he's saying is, don't mope around saying, oh, me, poor me. You know, straighten up, get a backbone. You know, straighten the path for your feet. You know what I mean? If you ever go to Israel, if you've ever been there, you know that when you walk, you're going to stumble on a rock someplace, because that's all there is in that sand, is rock and sand. And so, get all the stumbling out of the way, and go forward. Clear the path, make it straight. Stand up. Don't be mealy-mouthed. Don't be a whiner and a complainer. Get strong. Verses 14 and 16. He wants you to make sure you are who you say you are. Listen to this. Pursue peace with all people and holiness, without which no one will see the Lord. Looking carefully, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God, lest any root of bitterness spring up, cause trouble, and by this many become defiled. Lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau, who for one morsel of food sold his birthright. For you know that afterward, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected. For he found no place for repentance, though he sought it diligently with tears. The word pursue means to make an eager pursuit, really go after it. Eagerly pursue peace is what he's saying with all people, but especially pursue holiness or your sanctification. Try to make your life righteous. Work on that, without which no man will see the Lord. What the writer's talking about is not sanctification, which is positional. In other words, you are sanctified. You are set apart for God. You are saved. He's talking about the practical sanctification in your day-to-day living. You live righteousness every day. You grow in righteousness. You grow closer to the Lord the closer you are to righteousness. Looking carefully is from the Greek word meaning to see, in the sense as to have oversight of yourself. In fact, the word is also where we get our English word episcopal, which means overseer. So we are to oversee ourselves. In other words, we're to judge ourselves. You know? We're to look out and make sure that we are doing what God is asking us to do. And we help others do that too. He says, lest anyone fall short of the grace of God. Now this is not losing salvation. Look back at chapter 4, verse 16, and look what the writer says there. Because this is what he's talking about. Chapter 4, verse 16. It says, let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Everybody associates grace with salvation because it is. Salvation is grace. God's riches at Christ's expense. But all through our life we receive grace from God. The peace that passes all understanding is a grace we receive from God. I mean, we don't deserve it, but He gives it to us. There's a lot of graces we have that come from God that does not involve salvation, that comes after salvation. And so what he's saying here is, you don't want to fall short of the graces that you need to survive this life. Don't fall short of that. They're available. Graces are God's promises. Let's put it that way. And God promised it, you will have it. But you got to ask for it. So many times we get ourselves in a situation, what's the first thing we do? Try to figure out how to get out of it. But it's so much simpler to ask God's grace to help you. And He will. So that's the grace he's talking about here. The graces that we live by. So, we need grace when we're having problems. And so we ask God for grace in the time of need. It says, lest any root of bitterness springing up cause trouble. Whenever you get in that poor me or why me or this isn't fair attitude, that is the root of bitterness. Selfishness is the root of bitterness. When you think more of yourself than you do of someone else or whatever you're doing, when everything's always all about you, you're going to be a bitter person. Think about it. Anybody who's that way, they're always bitter, aren't they? If things don't go their way, they're bitter. So, the root of bitterness, when it springs up, will always cause trouble. And it does. And he says, lest there be any fornicator or profane person like Esau. Esau wasn't a fornicator, but he was profane. Why is that? Because profane is someone who tramples on spiritual matters. And birthright is a spiritual matter. Esau had the birthright, but he was willing to give it up. He didn't care one morsel about it. Oh, he did. He wanted a bowl of stew or porridge or lentil soup, whatever it was. That's all he cared about, his birthright. Make me a good bowl of soup and you can have it, man. But later, he realized there was some material possessions that came with that, yes.
And they're still wanting it back. I mean, the birthright, there's
That's right.
still
Yeah, he's the great cause of all we're seeing over these in the Middle East.
They're gonna take it back.
But when he found out there was material blessings that came with that, he wanted it back. But it was too late. God promised Esau a nation and people, and he kept his promise there, didn't he? There's times when we get away from God and we go back and we trample on spiritual things, and we're in a place where we're not going to come back to God. You're still saved, but God will take you home to save your soul, destroy your flesh. It can happen. When he wanted it, he was rejected. He'd gone too far. Esau did more than just sell his birthright. He despised his birthright. That's what it says in Genesis. He says in Genesis 25:34, and Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. Then he ate and drank, arose and went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. So it was more than just rejecting it. He despised it. That's what God said in Genesis. He went too far. Verses 18 through 24. For you have not come to the mountain that may be touched and that burned with fire, to blackness and darkness and tempest and the sound of a trumpet and the voice of words, so that those who heard it begged that the word should not be spoken to them anymore. For they cannot endure what was commanded. And if so much as a beast touches the mountain, it shall be stoned or shot with an arrow. And so terrifying was that sight that Moses said, I am exceedingly afraid and trembling. But you have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to an innumerable company of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn, who are registered in heaven, to God the judge of all, to the spirits of just men made perfect, to Jesus the mediator of the new covenant, and to the blood of sprinkling that speaks better than that of Abel. He's describing the believer's position now as opposed, or drawing a contrast, I should say, between where they are and where they are not. They were in a place where, at Mount Sinai, when Moses received the law and God said, don't even touch this mountain, they were in a place of fear and trembling with the law. They had to keep it, or if not, they were going to hell. It was a covenant of fear. But he says, you're not there anymore. That's not where we are. We're in a covenant of grace. We've come to Mount Zion. We've come to the city of a living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. We're with the company of angels, and that meant something to Jews. Remember, they thought so much about the angels. When we first started off in the book of Hebrews, they had to tell them how Jesus was greater than the angels. And now we're in company with angels. Yeah? The general assembly and church of the firstborn who are registered in heaven. We're members of the church. We have our citizenship in heaven. We're not in that old place anymore. You don't have to have fear and trembling. But we do need to understand that God does still correct. He corrected them, and he'll correct us. The difference is he does it in love, and he does it for righteousness' sake. And in fact, that's what that was for, but they didn't understand it. Now we have the Holy Spirit within us, and we can understand it better. And then we'll finish 25 through 29. See that you do not refuse him who speaks. For if they did not escape who refused him who spoke on earth, much more shall we not escape if we turn away from him who speaks from heaven, whose voice then shook the earth. But now he has promised, saying, Yet once more I shake not only the earth, but also heaven. Now this, yet once more indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken as of things that are made, that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us have grace by which we may serve God acceptably, with reverence and godly fear, for our God is a consuming fire. Did y'all understand all that? I didn't. But I learned. Here's the application. Saying, don't plug up your ears to the voice of God. Okay? Not like the Israelites did at Mount Sinai. Remember, they promised they were going to do this, they were going to follow the laws, and they were not. They're going to follow the Ten Commandments, and what they do, rush right out and build them a golden calf and worship it. He says, don't plug your ears from the voice of God. And when he says, see that you do not refuse him who speaks, the writer's using the present tense. In other words, he is speaking God's word. And he knew he was. The writer points out that the shaking of Mount Sinai was symbolic of the future and final shaking of the heavens and earth. In Exodus 19:18, it states that whose voice then shook the earth. There was a shaking back then. But there will also be a future shaking. He quotes Haggai chapter 2, verse 6, which deals with the final shaking by referring to the shaking that will occur before the second coming. The shaking consists of the judgments of the great tribulation that precede the establishment of the Messianic kingdom. Notice I'm reading this so I can get it right. The writer requotes the statement of Haggai, and yet once more, the application is that which is shakeable is temporary, that which is unshakable is eternal. So when you see the shaking and the new shaking, one is because it was temporal. And the things that did not shake are the eternal things. The fact that the earth was shakeable once and will shake again shows the earth is temporary. That is why the shaking indicates the removal of those things that are being shaken, as of things that are made in order that the things which cannot be shaken may remain. Because those things which are shakeable or unshakable are eternal. The temple and the old covenant are shakeable. This is the bottom line of it all. Therefore, they are temporary. But the new Jerusalem and the new covenant are unshakable, and thus they are eternal. And that's what the whole thing, all that is about. The Old Testament and the temple, it's gone. The New Testament, the New Jerusalem and the new covenant are forever. Since our future is a kingdom which cannot be shaken, we need to appropriate grace to withstand the persecutions and serve God acceptably. We're going to be here forever. We need to serve God. What is acceptable service? It's that which is done in reverence and godly fear. Verse 28. And we do this. Why do we do it? Verse 29. Our God is a consuming fire. While God's a God of grace, he's also a God of judgment. Remember that. He loves us, but he judges us. He will judge us on the time we failed, which times we failed, when we failed to appropriate grace in the times we needed it. In other words, when we failed God. Whatever God asks us to do, he has given us the grace to do it. And so our judgment comes toward that. Did we do what God asked us to do? Because we could have done it if we would have asked for the grace to do it. How do you ask for the grace? 2 steps. God, I know this is what you want me to do. Help me. Second step. Take a step and go do it. And then the grace will follow right with you. And that's what Hebrews is all about. Really. It's all about understanding who Jesus is, what our life is to be in grace, and to do it. Because if we don't, we can get to a state in our lives where Christ is not as important as he was when we were saved. And we step back out of the picture and let all the other Christians enjoy their peace and joy, and we're miserable. And he doesn't want you to be miserable. But you belong to him now, and things are going to be done God's way. You got your free will, but don't think you won't get spanked if you get out of line. And that's Hebrews. A whole lot of words to say those things. But bottom line, that's what it is. Try to obey God. Try sincerely, because if you do, you will. Now, having said that, every one of us has failed at some time or another. Because I know that because he has told us, if you hadn't been spanked, you're not his child. And we all get spankings. That's what he said. Father, again, we just thank you for your word. I don't know what else to say. It convicts us. It makes us happy. It makes us sad. But it's your word. And no one ever said it would be easy to follow. But it will be rewarded. And so we take that promise, that grace that you've given us, that if we follow you, our lives will be good. Not perfect. Only Christ was perfect. But it will be good. And the best of all is that when we close these eyes for the final time on this earth, we will open